All right.
Nice beer. It's 11% though.
Mate, you're going to be absolutely hanging by the end of this episode.
I'll get drunk, sober up, and be hungover in the whole recording of this episode.
Ever wondered what happens to a distillery when it is no longer needed? Does the door just get closed and forgotten about? What about the casks in the warehouse and the bottles that now find themselves becoming highly desirable and crazy expensive? If you've always pondered all these questions, then you're in the right place this week on Not Another Whiskey Podcast, because we're going to dig into the subject of rejuvenated distilleries. Welcome, my friends and whiskey geeks. My name's Mitch Betchard, and as always, I'm joined by a man they call the Wonder Nose, not because he's got a great ability to sniff out characteristics within whiskey, but because it is so massive. I just call him Daz. How you doing, mate?
I'm good. It's really hard, isn't it, to sort of sit here silently and just let you crack on with these insults.
You love it though, don't you? Secretly, you really like it deep down inside.
I do. It's my nose is definitely sizable. There's no doubt about that. Easy target. Yeah, mate. Well, look, if you're new around here and you haven't caught up with us before and you're joining the podcast for the first time, we are now on our 24th episode, which is quite remarkable. This episode, Mitch, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at these legendary distilleries. And actually, the reason why they've become legends, almost myths, is because of their closure and also the liquids that they've produced in the past as well. So to help us along the way, mate, what I thought I would do is I'd catch up with an old buddy of mine, Andy Flatt, who looks after the brand home up at Brora, which is one of these legendary distilleries that had disappeared for many, many years back in the 80s and was reopened just last year. So, it was really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, it was a really good chat. That sorry, I missed it. I've been in training, getting my cycling done for my Isla trip coming up, where I'm going to be cycling around Isla and Jura. So, I think I was pumping out
bigger fish to fry. Athlete these days.
That was like a 30-mile cycle that day. But really good interview that. And also I sat down, we kind of went solo on this episode, mate, because I sat down with Gordon Dundas from Ian Macleod Distillers.
Sorry I couldn't join you, mate. I was washing my hair. Yeah,
it's fine, mate. So that's a big job to do something. That. You know, including that beard as well. You know, you've got a lot of
I did my beard too, just for you. Yeah, it was starting to grow stuff.
So as some of you may know, Ian Macleod Distillers are about to reopen the legendary Rosebank distillery over in Falkirk. So really interesting to sit down with Gordon, chat about that. That's going to come up on the show. But before we get into this whole rejuvenated distillery themed what has been happening in the world of dazziness these days? What have you been up to?
A few things going on, mate. I was over on Isla not that long ago. I was over at Bowmore, a distillery I hadn't been to for quite some time, I must say. And they, as part of their collaboration with Aston Martin, 18 Aston Martin DBXs were created with Bowmore. And they used some of the copper from an old wash still, used some of the Bowmore tartan and some of the interior linings and stuff. And I actually managed to take the Aston Martin out for a little spin, which was pretty special. It was pretty nice. I'm not going to lie.
Was it fast?
And I had a really good, it's quick, mate. Yeah, it's really powerful. It's an amazing thing. I'll put a photo up on the Instagram channel of the car, so you can see it with some of its wee bits and pieces and things. I think I might have a video of me driving it as well. So if I'm allowed, I'll put it up. But it was really nice. Certainly different from driving my car. But I had a bit of a nightmare, mate, going over. I'm not going to lie. I left Edinburgh about 9 o'clock. I phoned the George Hotel, told them I was going to be checking in late at about 11:30 at night. And I got stopped at the Rest and Be Thankful as part of this road resurfacing works. I got stuck for an hour and a half. So I finally got to the George Hotel at about 1:30 in the morning. And there was nobody there. The doors were locked, so I couldn't check in. So I had to sleep in my car on that. Yeah, I had to sleep in my car that night. No way. Yeah. So I got straight out of my car, straight onto the ferry, no shower, no real opportunity to change my clothes and things. So I'm not going to lie, I wasn't in the best form when I finally got to Islay. It's usually the other way around,
That's brutal, mate. That's brutal.
Yeah, that's
Well,
what I feel like.
I haven't had any disgusting stories like that going on with me, thankfully. I haven't had to sleep in my car. No, I'd been pretty busy, a lot of stuff going on. I did an in-person tasting for the first time, which was quite nice recently. So I did a charity tasting that I put together for Ukraine, which you helped me out on. So thanks for donating some stuff for that. And that was great, man. It was just in my local town of Aberdour, and we raised £1,300 for the charity. And it was a lot of fun, actually. That's the first time I've done an in-person tasting in a while. When was the last time you did an in-person tasting?
Oh, one of the whiskey shows, I suppose. Does that count? I've just drawn a blank there.
I know. When was the last that's what I mean. Because of COVID, it kind of feels weird, right? I mean, I was in a room there was 20 people there, and I'm like, wow, this is so cool. Actually doing this again.
Did you get clammy hands?
Nah, I didn't. That was a good thing. It's like, I think it's like riding a bike when you've done it for so long. You just jump back straight into it.
I knew you were going to say that. It's just like riding a bike. That's just what I do.
So anyway, let's chat about what we're drinking tonight before we get into this.
Okay. Well, funnily enough, I actually don't have a glass of whiskey in front of me right now, but I will grab one. I'm on a beer right now. I was at the Drygate Brewery today, and one of the fellas over there, lovely of them, gave me their spiced Belgian quad, which is an 11% strong Belgian style beer. Very delicious, rich, fruity, spicy. Really enjoying it. I love tripels, like Belgian triples. And he was telling me today that these are quite similar, just a bit stronger, maybe not quite as light. So yeah, very tasty beer.
So for anyone listening, when you hear by the end of the episode that Daz is like just stumbling and falling over and slurring his words, that's the reason why he's drinking 11% beer.
Probably just hear me snoring, mate, to be honest.
Mate, I'm excited. I'm drinking a Birds and the Bees beer.
You just popped a whiskey.
And I'm going to have a bit of Lagavulin, 11-year-old. So this is the one, I actually cracked this for the tasting that I was just talking about. This is the Nick Offerman one that I got from the distillery when I was over in Islay. And I cracked it for the tasting.
Finished in a Guinness cask, yeah?
Exactly, mate. Yeah. And it was the first time I tried it for the tasting. And it's got this really nice, like, dark chocolate coffee on the nose that you don't normally get with Lagavulin. So, Daz, let's get back onto the subject we're here to talk about
let's do
this evening, right? I think, as always, it's good to kind of set the scene and talk about why a distillery would actually close its doors. And there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, I mean, let's be honest here, the liquid is crap, right? A distillery is just not performing well. It shuts down, it never reopens. And for me, I don't know if you've got any good examples of this, but for me, the best example I know of is Parkmore up in Speyside. And one of the reasons it closed down was because the water source, apparently, it was very hard. There was a lot of lime scale, and it affected the stills. And that one of the quotes that I found was that the distillery manager actually from Parkmore was once heard saying, come away in and I'll offer you a dram of the worst whiskey in Scotland. So even the distillery manager knew it was bad. The other big reason is it could have been surplus to requirements during the lack of demand for whiskey at the time, right? And you know, we've got these obvious points in time within Scotch whiskey where this is going to happen. Prohibition being one of them. World Wars, the other one. Then we move into the 60s, I suppose the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s all were a bit of a depressed time for Scotch whiskey. You know, we move into the 80s where everyone starts having different drinking habits. They start drinking Bacardi, vodka becomes a massive thing, and whiskey kind of takes this sort of back seat. We then have these whiskey locks coming up. And during the 80s, we see massive closures of whiskey distilleries, either being mothballed or completely closed down and turned into something else.
Yeah, I think, you're right. I mean, what's clear, right, is in the history of whiskey is there are clear ups and downs. And you mentioned the 60s. There was a huge amount going on in the 60s. 60s, almost like the mid-2000s, huge amounts of closed distilleries reopening. Most distilleries doubling in capacity or adding new stills. And all of that was obviously fueling growth of blends, big blends and light blends, J&B, Cutty Sark, these blends that were really starting to sort of take the world by storm, if you like. And we saw that kind of moving into the 70s. And there was a huge amount of promise around those 2 decades. But what had happened was obviously in the 60s and 70s, as distilleries had upped capacity and started to create much more whiskey, I think the sales guys were maybe committing to too much. And there was a bit of a, well, where are these orders? We were told that these were forecasts, and now it's not there. And I guess in a very competitive time, at a time where they hadn't done this before, it makes sense, and they got it wrong. And in the 80s, you're sat on a shit ton of stock that doesn't really have a home now. So you've got a lock, what was known as the whiskey lock.
And obviously the Patterson crash back in the 60s, that was massive as well.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting. I mean, I dug into the Patterson crash quite a bit, and those guys were just spending so much money. It was insane, right? I think their budget, I read, was equivalent to about £5 million a year. That was just on their marketing.
That was your expenses when the year you finished up with Glenfiddich.
That was my T&E, mate. Yeah. Those trips to Hawaii and everything, No, but the Patterson crash was huge as well. A lot of distilleries closed because of that. So I think, we can probably talk about all these different factors, right? And the ages and everything and what happened. But let's define what we're talking about here. And what we're talking about here is a mothballed distillery. So, how would you explain a mothballed distillery to someone?
Okay, what I've got in my head, most distilleries close. There's a number of distilleries in Scotland right now that haven't produced for a number of years, right? Literally, Knockando is a great example. It's been closed at least for 2 or 3 years. Dalhousie, where your Copper Brock is shut at the moment, probably won't open for 2 or 3 years. Keninish has been closed, I think, for 3 years. It happens quite a lot, right? And distilleries close. They don't need them all the time, operating all the time and stuff. So is that mothballed, or is that just a temporary closure? Difficult to say. What I would say is the distilleries that we're kind of focusing on today, Brora, Rosebank, these distilleries were closed with no real plan to reopen them at all. All right. So that's the ones I would like to talk about. So Port Ellen, Brora, Rosebank, those types of distilleries. The ones that are closed at the moment for 2 or 3 years, I don't really, yes, they're mothballed, but everything has been maintained. They've probably still got stock in the warehouses. Somebody's probably still there every day, just making sure that things are okay, and someone's managing them. These distilleries, I mean, I don't know. You've been a couple, haven't you? You've been to some of these distilleries that are just shut. They're gone, and you wear your camera and things like that, and they're effectively just abandoned, basically.
Yes. It's amazing to see. I've still never been into one that's it's still got all the equipment in it, and it's like
Brora was probably the best example of that, right?
Yeah, and also Rosebank as well, which we get into that a little bit with Gordon Dundas in a second. He talks about when the company took over Rosebank, there was still the part of the stills weren't there, but the washbacks were all there. The stills were actually stolen by someone.
The coppers were so valuable. People just steal that. People steal the lead on the window linings and all sorts of stuff, definitely. But I think so. My definition is a distillery that's been closed for about 20 years, that hasn't been manned, hasn't been managed, and it has real no plan. Ultimately,
literally just shut the doors, put a lock on it, and that's it.
I don't know this for a fact, but we could ask one of the guys, the operations people that deal with this stuff. I'm certain it must be more expensive to reopen a distillery than rebuilding a distillery from scratch, right? Yes. So it's about 12.5 million quid to build a decent sized distillery. I think something like an Ardnott or something like that would probably cost about that. I bet it costs more than that to reopen Brora. Yeah,
it's a good point. It's a very good point. And then, I think as well, when we're talking about distilleries that are just closed, gone, Campbelltown is a great example of that, right? So that's a case of where it was the area that fell victim. With Campbelltown, we see transportation of whiskey changing. Rail became more popular than sea. They also became a little bit greedy, I think, with what they were doing there. The quality went down a little bit, and Campbelltown, as most people listening will know, used to have 30 odd distilleries there, and now we're down to 3. So there is a big difference, I think, between when we talk about mothballing and then completely closed, no chance of ever opening up again.
Yeah, for me, I think like the rejuvenation of distilleries, kind of the theme for this in my head was much more about these distilleries that were named, that had product going out at one point, that then closed, and that are now going to reopen 25 to 30 years after their closure. And it's so exciting. And it is interesting because when you talk about those reasons, why do those distilleries close? Well, why did Port Ellen shut and Killeel stay open? The reason is that Port Ellen was old. It wasn't really producing whiskey that was superior or inferior to anything that Diageo could produce or DCL could produce on the island at the time. So Lagavulin survives and Killeel survives because they're bigger, they were more efficient, and they were more, I guess, fitting to what Diageo needed in terms of either a malt whiskey brand of stock or stock for blends. It's as simple as that. And it's remarkable, really, what's happened to Port Ellen, because now everybody's sort of clambering around going edition 1, edition 2, all that sort of stuff. Whereas at the time, remember, when we worked at Diageo, we could have bought any of those Port Ellens for about 80 quid.
Mate, I picked up release 1 for £25 in the staff shop. And I think what's interesting is, right, you get a lot of people who are very passionate about whiskey that look to the past and, say like, oh, it's just such good whiskey. I wish Port Ellen was still open. I wish Brora, and I'm going back to during our Diageo days, right? We were almost seen as the baddies with a lot of like real kind of whiskey connoisseurs that would say, I can't believe you're working for a company that closed down these amazing distilleries. And the way I always looked at that, I was like, well, yeah, that is a bit of a negative, but no one has a crystal ball as to how it's all going to work with whiskey. Yeah. And the second thing is someone like Diageo, the Pernod's of the world, yeah, they've had to make those tough decisions, but they've also done so much more positive things for pushing Scotch whiskey forward worldwide that is minuscule compared to closing down some of these distilleries. That was obviously a tough decision they had to do back in the day.
There's some great comeback stories. Look at Ardbeg, brilliant, closed for a good while, reopens, and I remember trying some of those products, still young, nearly there, and all that sort of stuff when that story was coming back to life in the early 2000s. And of course, the other is Bruichladdich, one of the great comebacks, of whiskey times, and we've seen it happen a number of times. And I think what we're seeing right now is another batch of closed distilleries coming back to life, and it's really exciting. And what we're doing, I mean, you and I, we're going to go to Lochleah very soon. We're going to go and see a brand new distillery in its infancy, its first few years, and it's such an interesting time when you've got all these new distilleries opening up, and then you've got a couple of these kind of sleeping giants, if you like, coming back online as well. And that's a really interesting mix of just sort of new, old but new, and everything in between.
Mate, what a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive. Do you know what you should do, Mitch? You should work in whiskey. Just give it a bash.
Yeah? You think I'd be all right?
I think you'd be all right, mate. Yeah, I think you'd be good at it.
I apply.
Yeah.
So anyway, mate, let's get into this. You sat down with Andy from Brora. You had a good conversation. Let's find out what he had to say about the Brora distillery.
We're going to be talking about, Andy, and we have talked about with Mitch, is the revival of some of these distilleries that were lost, and they were destined to be lost forever. But a few of these distilleries have been revived recently, and none perhaps more famous than the Brora distillery. I think that's fair to say, is it not?
I think, yeah, very fair to say. I mean, it's always exciting to see, distilleries come back. But I think in general terms, the revival, the restoration of Brora, it's one of the biggest things to happen in whiskey for as long as I can remember.
What are you doing there? And tell us a little bit about kind of how you ended up there.
So technically speaking, my job title is brand home host. Mm-hmm. So what I do is I essentially just host, look after the tours, make sure they run well, organize everything for clients and guests coming up. Yep. So I look after the brand home in the background as well, kind of admin and paperwork and the less kind of glamorous side. But in general terms, I'm kind of like, I'm the guy that's going to shake your hand at the front gate and show you around and give you the chat. Everybody who comes there already loves Brora. It's not a hard sell to get someone to be excited about coming to Brora, because they already are. People that are coming there that feel they've got a connection with it. There's people who've never ever been there, who'll maybe wander through the courtyard and they'll just touch the side of the still house, or maybe put their hand on the still and just touch it, and they have this connection with the place. But you've never ever been there. It's this, this kind of ethereal thing, and it's just wonderful. And it took me a wee while to get used to it, how someone could be so. I mean, I've seen people with like misting up walking through the gates and stuff because they're just overjoyed to be there.
I mean, you guys are creating something very different at Brora, and it feels like that's a nice environment for you personally because of your interests.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've kind of concentrated on and what they kind of what we strive towards is just making people feel welcome. It's the home of Brora. It's the brand home. So you're coming into our home, please feel relaxed and welcomed. Like I don't wear a tie. It's just nice, relaxed, chilled out. People come in and make it feel welcome. But the beautiful thing there is that people tell me what they want to see and do there. The tour has a flow that when it's got a start time and an end time. But I can shorten it. I can play with it. We can do different things. So I kind of judge what people really, really want to see and what they want to do. And then at that point, in the first 5-10 minutes of meeting someone, sitting, having a coffee with them, chatting about what they're looking forward to the most, that's when I plan the tour.
Yeah.
So it's
for the guys listening that are going to make their way up to the North Highlands, what is available at Brora for, the whiskey enthusiast, the whiskey collector? What can they do at Brora?
Okay, so our experiences are different in the fact that we don't have them every day. So maybe some months in the quieter months of the year, we'll maybe have 4 or 5 in the whole month. Maybe in the summer it might be sort of 5 or 6. So what we're offering is small groups, and we're offering people the chance to come in to the brand home. We're not talking about a 45-minute tour here.
Yeah. Okay.
Experiences there are, we've got one that lasts around 3.5 to 4 hours, one that lasts around 5.5 hours. So you're there all day,
Right, okay.
But what that allows us to do is give a deep dive into everything, into Brora's history, its relationship with Brora the village, its industrial heritage, the restoration itself, how it was then, how it is now, what we've done to achieve that. You go into the distillery, and the whole point is you can interact with production. So if you're there at the right time, you can make the spirit cut. You can, temperate the water in the mash tun. You can start the mash tun. You can do sort of like gravity checks of the washbacks. You're encouraged to get involved with these things. You're crafting the spirit as you're there to get really into it. So it's just the fact that we can do something like that to bring people in and really get them involved. Because one thing Brora attracts is, whiskey geeks. I say the term whiskey geeks is like a term of endearment for me because I am one myself. So but there's again people who come there love Brora. Everyone's pretty much on it. They're well aware, but they're very well informed as well.
Yeah.
So
it's a long way to go without knowing where you're going.
It's definitely a destination. That's the thing, So nobody's driving past and pops in. To be fair, tours don't work like that. We like to book them in advance because we're lucky we have got a great food and beverage partner. So lunch is part of the day as well. So we have a fantastic lunch, local produce, and so on. So everything's just tailored to make it as bespoke as we can, and just have that lovely, relaxed feeling of just taking our time.
No, it's brilliant. No, it's great. It's great actually to hear just how it is being brought back to life. And you talked a little bit about how it was in the past and how it is now. Just kind of roughly, what kind of changes have been made at the distillery to sort of bring it back in to production? There must have been some compromises or some changes that they went right out of the 3 styles that we made in the past. We're going to pick one and we're going to go for that moving forward. What's changed and what's not?
So first thing really is not a lot has changed.
Right.
So kind of working.
That was easy.
That's question answer.
That's it, done. We'll move on.
So we were lucky. We still had the original stills. Because the still house itself was in such a state of disrepair, it was impractical to take the stills out. But when you have the original stills, that's like the beating heart of the distillery, isn't it? Yeah. But because the stills and you see them and see the volumes and so on, you can then reverse engineer the whole process to go, right, we need a wash charge of this size. We need so many wash backs to do so many mashes per week, and we need a mash tun this big. But every piece of equipment we have in there is based on what was there before. Yeah, like our mash tun is an exact replica of the rake and plough mash tun that Abercrombie's installed in the early 1970s.
Right. Okay.
So everything is the fermentation times, the temperatures of the water and the wash backs, the volumes. That's all taken from Mashman's records from like the 1960s and 70s.
Oh, okay.
The same, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I would suggest that has changed is like energy efficiency. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we use less cooling water, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're more water efficient. The whole point is we're not trying to make as much Brora as we can, as quick as we can.
Yeah.
We're making it how they did back then.
Brilliant. Yeah. What year was it shut? Was it 83?
83 it shut, yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of around that time that Port Ellen, and there was quite a few distilleries that sort of went into sort of silent modes at that point.
At that point, from Scottish Malt Distillers, SMD, there was 11 distilleries closed, and then 2 grain distilleries as well.
What sort of stands out as a whiskey that you've tried from Brora that will sort of stay on your lips forever, if you like?
Yeah, but I mean, there's so many to pick from, and there's so many different there's the 3 core styles, but if you think back to like the Broras of the early 70s,
right,
72 in particular,
right,
it's like this kind of golden vintage when it was this kind of like earthy, robust style was just so prevalent, and that became what Brora was for a lot of people. So even though we were closed for nearly 40 years, people who were really, really into whiskies, and they were still accessible,
Yeah.
So people would hoard these early 70s Broras, and pretty much the reason that we are talking about Brora now is because of those golden vintages, those fantastic years.
For such a legendary distillery where the whiskies were very highly kind of sought after, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, people are scrambling around in the secondary market, and they're looking to buy bottles at a high price, but they know they're probably going to go up in price and continue to do so. When people come and you've got this, it's almost like when a famous musician retires, right? Or a great player retires. Sometimes they come out and they shouldn't have, and do one more gig or play one more game. And, how has that gone down with the kind of Brora lover, the person that bought Brora from the 70s, and they've come up and seen you guys? Have they kind of fallen back in love, another time with Brora almost? Has it kind of had that kind of effect? Or have a few people gone, should have kept it closed?
Yeah. You know what? That's a really valid point, actually, and it's a great question. But what I would say is that because we've worked so hard to replicate the process exactly as it was, or as close to it as we can now, and because we put over 250,000 labour hours into the restoration work, the stonework.
It's the stonework I've seen. I haven't been in, but I've driven past and I've come up to the kind of gates, and the stonework looks remarkable. It looks beautiful.
It's beautiful. It really, really is. And that's all reclaimed. So we've reused the same. I mean, the site was listed. Yeah. So that's all reclaimed. I mean, it's all local limestone from. There's a quarry used to be a quarry only a couple of miles away. Yeah, and people see the effort we've put in. It was never the intention to make something that looks, although it does look beautiful. It was never the intention to make something that looks good now. It's about what's going to look good in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years for like future generations. So whoever takes over from me, and whoever takes over from the person who takes over from me in the chain of master distillers, it's more like this. We've brought it back, and then we're kind of passing it on.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant to hear about it, man. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch up soon for a dram in real life. I look forward to that very much.
Maybe perchance a cheeky wee sherry as well.
Wee sherry too. There we go. Class.
Daz and Mitch's Whiskey News of the Week.
I think most of the Islay distilleries have announced their Fèis Isle plans, and they're coming in thick and fast. Everyone has a day, or some people share a day. So obviously I was working at Jura for the last 5 years, and Jura usually shared its day with either Bunnahabhain or Kilhoman. So yeah, lots going on over on Islay. We're going to see tons of people coming over. I'm going over for not Bruichladdich Day. I'm going over for Bunnahabhain Day. As a guest, Mitch. How about that?
Oh, look at you. Very posh. I'm excited about Ardbeg, what they're doing, because it looks like they're going to have like this World of Punk Day, and they're releasing, and this is just because I'm on their mailing list. I don't know any more about this, but it looks like an hardcore edition, which I love the sound of, you know. The other thing that's out, I suppose, talking about festivals, the Spirit of Speyside Festival is almost upon us, and I don't know if you've had a look at the events that are on there, mate, but there's some crackers. Absolute crackers.
Some really good ones. Really good ones. So you're involved. So you guys at Larkfire are going to be doing a number of events, which looks class. Really, really excited about that. I'm going to come up on the Wednesday night. I'm going to go to Glenfiddich for one of the opening dinners. I suppose you'll be there.
I'll be there, mate. I think it'll be cool, mate. I mean, I'm excited about the ones that I'm doing with Larkfire because we based one around water, obviously being Larkfire, and it's a distillery water tour that I'm doing with some pretty big names within the whiskey industry. So we're going to start at the Downs, have a little highball there, and then we're going to head down to Ballindalig, meet my good friend Colin Poppy, who's the distillery manager there, have a wee dram, talk about the water source there, and then we're going to head up to the water source at Glenfiddich, chat with our good mate Mark Thompson, who's going to pull out some sexy Glenfiddich, have a dram by the water source there. And then this is the exciting part. We're going to head down to Glen Grant, hang out with Dennis Malcolm, go for a little walk through the gardens there and pull out a couple of Glen Grants, and then head down to Tamdhu to finish it off. This is a crazy tour, man. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Tamdhu with Gordon Dundas and Sandy McIntyre by the Spey with a Tamdhu in hand.
Big news from Gordon and the team at Tamdhu is that they've just released an 18-year-old, which is big news. And I'm a big fan of Tamdhu. Funnily enough, actually, my big brother, not a whiskey guy at all. He's a lager guy. Tamdhu, he absolutely loves. Every time he's like, what is in that stuff? And I'm like, mate, it's just good whiskey. It's as simple as that. Great casks, great distillery style, big time. And last piece of news, although we've covered it in the last episode, but we should just mention it again. Nice release from Craig Ellicky, the Armagnac release. Very cool. I like that. Big fan of that. Looking forward to seeing what's coming next from those guys.
There's a lot happening. There's a lot happening in the world of whiskey. It's tough to keep up, you know, but we're keeping on the ball here. We're keeping you guys, the listeners of Not Another Whiskey Podcast, involved in what's happening in whiskey. You're welcome. Let's just reel off some of the distilleries that have kind of gone through this mothball rejuvenation process, right? So Bladnoch, interesting one, ex-Diageo one. It's gone through a couple of different owners since then, and now we've got Mr. Savage down there from Macallan.
Nick Savage is down there. We'll get Nick on, definitely, and have a chat with him about Bladnoch and hear about what's going on. And you've also got Shane over in Australia, who's kind of their ambassador as well. He's a great guy. So yeah, we've got a couple of good pals over at Bladnoch that we should definitely catch up with. It's a beautiful site, beautiful distillery.
And then we've got the obvious ones, Port El and Brora that we talked about. Now, this is an interesting one that I put in there. It's not really rejuvenated, but Lindor's Abbey, right? Lindor's Abbey, for me, it wasn't really a distillery. It was a monk, first written record of Scotch whiskey. Now it's a distillery. So essentially, it's a new distillery, but it was a distillery, kind of. It's very tenuous with regards to this.
I'll take it. I think it is. There's nothing from the old distillery at all that's in the new distillery.
You're right.
Nothing other than the story. So to me, it's not a rejuvenation of an old distillery. What it is a distillery that's inspired by history. That's what I would say. Okay.
So I think that may be another episode, man.
Do you know what? It can be. However, what I would say is that Annandale is probably as far as you can stretch it. The Annandale distillery closed just as the end of the First World War, pretty much, 1918, and then reopened in 2007. So almost 100 years later, that distillery does come back. Again, I don't think, I'm not sure if there's any buildings or any walls or anything like that were used from the original site. I think there's a bit of warehousing. Was there something like that?
Well,
left?
I mean, I've been down there, and the only bit that I saw was when they did a dig, they found where the original stills were, which is really cool to see when you go down there.
Ardbeg, we've talked about. Bruichladdich, we've talked about. They were closed. One of the funny things I always remember, people would go to Bruichladdich. So sometimes I would take groups over to Islay and I'd say, like, go to a couple of distilleries, have a wee wander about and see what's happening. And every time they would go to Bruichladdich, they would always talk about when White Mackay shut them down. and then obviously guys like Mark Rayner and Jim McEwen and stuff came back and sort of saved the day. And it was quite interesting, actually, because you still, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. The impact of a closing distillery and what it has on the local community is felt for a long time. I don't know about Rosebank. I've not spoken to anybody that's worked at Rosebank, or I don't really know anyone from the area of Falkirk particularly. But I'm sure Gordon and the guys can give us a bit of an insight into that.
Hey, Gordon, how you doing, man? Great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Another great podcast. Looking forward to being with you.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. You know, Daz and I have chatted a lot about getting you on here, so it's long overdue, mate. It's long overdue, and we need to do a proper one as well when we sit down with a couple of drams. This is going to be a really punchy one this time, but yeah. I don't know, dude. Maybe we do a little collaboration with Whiskey Unscripted, your podcast as well. That could work.
Watch this space, everybody. I think not another Whiskey Unscripted podcast could happen, but we'll see.
What an idea that would be. Gordon works for Ian Macleod Distillers, and he is the brand advocacy director. That's a very posh title you've got now, mate.
Well, it's literally about 3 days old, but yes, it is. It's a very posh title. It's basically, ensuring that we are talking in the right frame about our brands in terms of, really engaging with all the channels across the world. It is a posh title, but it's really just about, doing what you and I have done for many years, and Daz, of course, which is just enthusing and educating and really getting people, on board with your brands. So,
Gordon, if anyone isn't aware of Ian Macleod brands, let's talk about them. What do you look after?
So we've got 2 whiskey distilleries currently, which is Glengoyne, and we also have Tamdhu, which I've just returned from up on Speyside, and we also have another brand called Smokehead, which is a really, really interesting Islay whiskey brand, and our final distillery that we have, which we're rebuilding currently, is Rosebank. So those are our 4 single malt whiskies.
And Rosebank is what we're going to concentrate on today. As much as I'd love to talk to you about Tamdhu, because it is one of my favorites, especially after hanging out with the legend that is Sandy McIntyre up there recently and drinking some amazing Tamdhu down by the Spey with him. That was such a fun time. But so let's talk about Rosebank. And for you, how important is this rebuild of this iconic distillery? I mean, we're talking about a distillery that can trace its roots back to 1840, I think it is, and was then mothballed in 1993. So for you, how important is this to you, and how proud are you to be part of this whole sort of legacy of it being rebuilt?
Well, I mean, the key thing is it is one of those whiskies or distilleries that's held in remarkable esteem. And there might be a few reasons for that. One of them, of course, similarly to Brora and Port Ellen, for example, is that they've not been available, they've not been producing. So everybody wants a little bit of something they can't get. But I think Rosebank had a really unique style to it, and that's why Michael Jackson, the famous whiskey writer, did once say that if there was a God, Rosebank would be reborn. Well, we are doing that, and so I would hope that he's looking down on us and going, "Great, I'm glad to see that." So, I mean, I'm very proud to be involved. Ian Macleod is proud to have been able to do it. I know Leonard, who's our managing director, is highly excited about the whole. And this has been a long-term thing. This has been, 5, 6, 7 years. This has been going on for, and we're now 4 or 5 months from producing spirit. So it really is an exciting time. But we're also aware of the responsibility. We want to produce. This is effectively a new distillery, although we are rebuilding it on the same site with the same stills and all that type of thing. But we have this amazing legacy of what Rosebank was and how many fans there are of it around the world, and really how it was, the signature lowland for a lot of people. So there's responsibility as well, but we've got great distilling talent and great people within our business. So we're really excited, really, really excited.
It's amazing to see. I mean, if someone had said to you 10 years ago, we're going to see Port Ellen, Brora, and Rosebank opening back up again. I don't know about you, but I would have laughed in their face, right?
Yeah, and I think the really funny thing about it was that it all happened within 2 days in 2017. I remember I'd literally only just joined Ian Macleod, and I got a hint in my interview that there might be something happening. But I remember, I'll tell you the story. Leonard had been working very closely with Diageo, and they'd been very, very, helpful, and we've got a good relationship with them. And I think they said to us, or said to Leonard, look, could you wait until a particular date in October before you? Yeah, fine, no problem. And well, I'll tell you why. And this is the MD, I think, of Diageo. Yeah. And Leonard's like, no, don't tell me. I'll probably just tell somebody by mistake. So don't bother telling me. So on that Monday, boom, Brora, Port Ellen coming back, and we sudden meeting in our office. I'll just go on Tuesday. So we just went on Tuesday. And I remember getting a message from Becky Paskin of ScotchWhiskey.com going, the 1 week I'm on holiday. And look what happens.
No way. Brilliant. And so how did that, could you give us an insight into, I don't know how much you know about this, but with Leonard, with those discussions with Diageo, how did that all go? For such a big distillery like that, there must have been a lot of negotiation going on, right?
Yeah, it's like all these things. It's about relationships. It's about, I don't know anything about the actual negotiations, but look, I think we were in a good position. They were happy to work with us because they know us, and we managed to get it over the line eventually. And I think that's the most important thing, because unfortunately Rosebank had a couple of false dawns in the past, and I think everybody was a bit skeptical, and I genuinely, until I think they saw things being built. And I was speaking to a guy outside the distillery about a month ago when I was there watching the stills drop in, and he said, I cannot believe I'm seeing this day, and the enthusiasm is brilliant, and I know that we're as excited as anybody, so it is hugely exciting. And we can't wait to start producing spirit. We've got Malcolm Rennie, who's come from Lochlee. And he's experienced at this sort of aspect of distilling in terms of starting it up was involved in Kilhoman and things like that. So he's got a great CV, and I can't wait to get going. I really can't wait.
And let's talk about production of it. How closely have you guys looked at the old production process from that distillery, and how closely are you going to be copying that?
Well, we've looked at it as closely as we can, and we've been in the, again, Diageo have been very helpful, but we've looked at the stills, and we've looked at all the sort of elements, but there's a whole lot of unknowns that we don't have. We don't have new make spirit, for example. So we've got to sort of work that out. But as I said, there's a huge amount of talent there. What we have done, of course, is we have dropped in exactly the same shape stills. So quite odd shaped stills at Rosebank. Like the wash still has a flat top on it, and the intermediate still is really, really long and narrow, and the third still is quite short and fat, which is all a bit. But then, of course, they condense it through worm tubs, which makes it even odder for triple distilled. So, hey, I think Malcolm is a little bit like, there's so many things to play with here, So he can't wait. So it's really, really exciting from that perspective. But yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, and a lot of things have changed as well in terms of barley varieties, how you fire stills, all these things have changed. So we've got to understand all that. But I actually think we can produce probably a better whiskey.
It's going to be so interesting. I think, one of the things that Daz chatted to Andy from Brora about recently was, in the interview that we just put in this episode, actually, was all about how the whiskey geeks out there are so excited about, Brora coming back to life. I'm assuming that's going to be exactly the same with Rosebank, right? You must have had already a load of people messaging you guys about this. In the couple of years since we really released and put the brand out there as it is, and releasing all the old whiskies that we acquired in the deal as well. So we all the whiskies before 1993, between 89 and 93, we have all the remaining casks of Rosebank. So we've been bottling some of those. Built up
9,000 people who really want to keep hearing about Rosebank and part of our club and Facebook pages, and the engagement is great, and people cannot wait to come and visit and cannot wait to come and see and want to see the videos and want to see the stills and want to see all these. So it's really, really good. We're not going to be open to the public until 2023, but we are heavily sort of engaged in the whole aspect of this, because we have those worldwide fans, we have the local Falkirk community, which are really proud of what's going on, and we have really a really big role to play for this distillery. So we are it's very, very exciting. And even simple things like we're thinking about now, and what we've been thinking about for a few months, of what the tours are going to look like and how we're going to engage with people, because actually we don't have any whiskey to pour. So all these things are really, really interesting. Well, we do, but it's very old whiskey. So we can't pour that for everybody. But, there's all those sorts of things that we just need to consider.
Mate, it's going to be amazing. I'm for one really excited about you giving me the invite to the opening and getting Daz along as well. Actually, you can ignore. You don't have to invite Daz. You can just invite me. That just really annoys him when people do that. So
I couldn't do that. Probably be February, March, hopefully 2023.
Okay, and that's going to be for production, or is that going to be
no production's going to be this year? I'm hoping, although it doesn't take much for things to be put off course at the moment. If you have a delay on something, it's not a week or two, it's months, because of, well, we all know what's going on in the world at the moment. So we're hoping that's not the case, but the times may slip. That's just what happens at the moment.
Yeah. So as we record this is in April 2022. So you reckon what?
September.
End of September? Okay.
Maybe October.
Mate, thank you so much for the little insight you've given us there. And like I say, really excited to see this open, mate. And looking forward to chatting to you again soon with a couple of drams in hand next time on the podcast, right?
Yeah. Definitely. Let's get some drams sorted out and do a bit of podcasting.
Look, it's always good to hear Gordon chat, and I know he's been on site at Rosebank and he's been catching up with guys on a really regular basis, and I'm kind of following the Rosebank story through him actually a lot, through his own Instagram page.
Absolutely.
Or, just from his updates on Facebook and stuff. So yeah, really cool to hear it from the horse's mouth actually. And Mitch, it sounds like that was almost an invite.
Yeah, I reckon so, mate. And for those that haven't checked out, if you want another whiskey podcast to check out, go and check out Gordon's, the Unscripted Whiskey Podcast, I think it's called. Is that right?
It is. Yep.
Yeah,
it is.
And
Whiskey Unscripted.
We may be talking about a little bit of a collaboration coming in the summertime, which could be a lot of fun to do with him. Yeah. But guys, hopefully you've enjoyed that episode. Thank you so much to our guests, Andy and Gordon, for jumping on and helping us out with this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode, because next week, Daz and I are traveling down to Lochlear, one of Scotland's newest distilleries, one of the newest releases that we've seen. And we're going to sit down with John Campbell, who's the new distillery manager there.
Mate, and I'm really looking forward to that trip. It's going to be really nice. So, Mitch, just before we close off, one thing I must mention. So, as always, I do tend to run over a little bit, or I'm always late. I'm never really quite listened to the brief. So I spoke to Andy Flatt for a lot longer than I was supposed to. Hadn't caught up with him in a little while. So rather than releasing just one episode this week, we are going to release two. So we have the Rejuvenated Distilleries episode, this one that you're listening to right now, but also we're simultaneously going to release a 30 minutes with Andy Flatt at Brora, because I talk too much, basically, is the moral of the story here.
It's actually really interesting, not because of Daz's chatting in it, but what Andy says about
all
Brora.
I did was ask questions. Yeah, all I did was ask questions. Yeah.
But it is really interesting. If you're interested in Brora, you want to hear what Andy says about it, because there's some really insightful little bits, little nuggets that he gives. And he actually gives some information about Brora that I didn't know about as well. I'm sure you didn't know about as well, Daz, right?
No, mate, tons of stuff. And look, he was part of the reopening team. He's been getting his head into it. And Andy's he's such a good lad, mate. He had his amateur drama blog and stuff like that as well. So he's a guy who's really passionate, really, really into whiskey.
Yeah.
And it was a great interview. So yeah, check it out. Definitely check it out. So yeah, and then we've got a busy few weeks ahead, mate. May is going to be here in no time.
Cranking, mate. Cranking. But guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Daz, good to see you, mate. Till next time.
See you soon. Mitch, thanks for coming.
Super.